What's up, everybody? Mike Johnson, Yellow Buffalo here. Glad to see you back on the channel. I am just chilling, kicking back. It is just a regular Thursday night for me. I know things are popping off over there at the ice building, and it's usually pretty quiet during the day from what I hear, and then at night is when things get pretty rowdy. Not so much from the protesters, but on the other end, there have been some arrests. I'm some miles away from that area of town, so I'm fine. So, people, oh my God, Portland's full. But, I was just out in the neighborhood. I've been out and around town, the past few days, and it's really just mellow, everyday Portland stuff. I don't think I've been on the west side of the river recently, but, at least in the last, this side of the river is usually pretty mellow, unless like the protests want to stretch out and stuff. But, this is really, really focused on what specifically people want. I guess that other building is a DHS building that's right next to that. So when I was mentioning that there was another protest going on, but the fact is, when you look at those videos and you see that smoke and you see that gas that's going into not only the protesters, but, anyone who is in that area, it's just got to be really rough for the people. I have not been in anything so wild. I have been to a couple of rallies, been to a couple of like exciting, protests and stuff, but nothing that has gotten so big. Being in Portland, you'd think that I may have wanted to go check some things out, but, I've always been more on the education, awareness, visibility aspect of activism as opposed to, the fighting aspect of activism. Because, I know that might make me seem like a wimp, but, I've done activism in my own personal life, on a daily basis. And I feel like going down there and shouting at the, government is not going to help me or anybody else with my ass being down there. Okay. It would be better for me to be online and say, hey guys, we know shipping people off like this is not cool. We shouldn't be doing this. And we get enough people online saying that, then it's like, yeah, all right, cool. So now what can we do? I get why protests are important because it has shaped our country. It has created and shaped our country. Without protests, without revolution, without just civil disobedience, we wouldn't have experienced the great change, the great social change that we have over this last century, I'm going to say. From workers' rights to women's ability to vote to civil rights for African Americans, Native Americans, Latin Americans, everybody, and that's, I always get so stumped when I want to name everybody because I'm just like, do I just want to say, oh, all four colors of man, or red, brown, yellow, black, and white. I never really think about that because I'm just like people, and where you're from. That's something that, I grew up with, especially in my family, it's like, yeah, somebody might be black, but they're from this place, and so that means that they have a different culture. Yeah, somebody might be white, but they're from this place, which means that they have a different culture, and so it's not like skin color wasn't a thing, but the fact was, we all actually, were looking at things differently, and I think that everyone does that. There was a point that I wanted to make, and I think I've kind of made my way this direction already, so I might as well say it. In the 1980s, in my eyes, if you were Italian, it's like, yeah, you were white, but you were Italian. If you were Russian, you were Russian. If you were, Spanish, you were Spanish. If you were, Irish, you were Irish. And I say that because white people, there is this big connection that you guys have now, and it's based off of skin color and it's based off of socioeconomic status. And I get it. We've talked about this already. But the fact is, even in my lifetime, people were still kind of skittish about, interactions, like there was, there was, a competition. I'll say competition amongst the other white groups. You get the WASP group that dominated American culture throughout its inception and even today. But now, as time has gone on, you get Italians that are now, you've been here for a long time. You are now white. You're Irish, your family's been here for a while. You might still be proud of being Irish, but you're white. You get people who are from Ohio and they don't know exactly what they are, but they've just been from Ohio their entire lives. I know people from Oregon that were like that before Ancestry came out. Before we could just spit in a tube and then send it over. But people didn't know. It got to the point where at least, for the most part, especially in the 80s and 90s, we were all Americans. And the reason why is because we were in the midst of the Cold War, and it was the end of the Cold War. Well, yeah, it was the end of the Cold War. I'd say, and I think everybody would agree with me that, when the Berlin Wall came down and, as the Soviet Union was breaking up and, all these countries, went back to their individual ethnic, cultural countries. I feel that America, was very, woo, yeah, pro-America, yeah, yeah. And so we have a lot of that. You've got Rambo, you've got, you've got all the action movies. I'll just say, that we grew up with, and it was very patriotic, and it was very pro-America, pro-war, fight, yeah, and none of us ever really thought about that, and then the Gulf War came around. I wasn't planning on talking about this anytime soon, but I guess I should, because that first video had me talking about, spiritual things, and I should talk about this as I get going, because I felt that something was wrong, and I am really trying to hone in on when the timelines or dimensions or what have you did whatever they did that are all wonky and Mandela effecty, and we all look at it now, and well, those of us who have been looking at it all look at it now and go, wow, I was doing this order. It's a delivery convenience store that we have here in the Portland area, and it's super awesome. I just tip them $3, and then they're like, "Yeah, thank you," and I don't have to drive anywhere. I still do drive, but they got $2 eggs, y'all. I can get a dozen eggs for $2. Are you kidding me? In the city, that is near impossible. So I'm not telling you where I get them either. They got a lot of them too. No, I'm sorry, y'all. I'm sorry. That's cold. I shouldn't be laughing because there's people who don't have any money and there's people who don't have any food. And, I do pray that you guys are blessed with all that you need and want and desire to your benefit. Because I know I am at the end of my financial rope, and I have been pretty much my whole life. I didn't think that I got a full ride scholarship to a very recognized university, to the School of Music. I got the vocal performance program. And I was going to go all the way, be an opera singer and everything. And there was just so much other stuff that was happening in my life, and I just want to come back to what I was talking about, but I have had this knowledge for a long time, My mom and my stepdad, rest both of their souls, they were out of town for something. I think either that or my mom was having a surgery. I think it was my mom was having a surgery, but either way, neither of them were available, and my grandma was there. So it was myself and my grandma and one or both of my sisters. It had to have been. I know they were both born at this time, but I remember watching and seeing the Gulf War on television, and I would see the cannons and the gunfire and everything, all the smoke, and I was just like, I looked at my grandma and I was like, why would they do this? And she just shook her head. I don't know, baby, I don't know. Here I am, 8 years old, 9 years old, something like that, and a couple of years later, there was something else traumatic that was going on. I think there was another war, because that was like 92, 91, 92. Well, okay, 1990, I was in the one house during the Gulf War, I'm pretty sure, 89, 90. And in 92 was when I was in this other house, and I can't remember what was happening. But there was a lot of traumatic stuff that I experienced, and I had this really scary dream. And there was this man, and he was in a suit. He was a white guy, and he walks up, got out of the darkness, and I am like above him, but it's almost like he's looking up at a camera in the corner or something. And he goes, I will have your soul. And then freaking, like, flames come up and I wake up. My grandma, of course she hears me and she comes in and, we call the pastor and the pastor tells me, don't worry, you don't have to worry about death yet. And, it gives me this verse that made me feel better, but that was not the first time I experienced things like that. Not the last time I experienced things like that. I mentioned this one because, I've talked about dreams. I've talked about dreams because, dreams are like a precursor to what's going to happen in the real world. You can get premonitions, you can get knowledge, prior knowledge of things that are going to happen through dreams because you have what's called the gross level. And when I say gross, I mean body. You have something here. It's corporeal. You have the corporeal level, okay? Or the, what they call carnal level. Then you have the mental level, the causal level, okay? The causal level is where everything that happens on the gross level or on the corporeal level happens, okay? We don't do anything out here unless we think of it up here. And what's happening on the spiritual level, the subtle level, is we're being guided and we're being, led in different directions, being given messages, being given different directions. A lot of times in the good way, a lot of times in the not so good way. And this is what we're dealing with, A lot of people call it a spiritual battle. And I have made it very clear with my conversation, as I call it, that I want this to be a conversation. I don't want this to be a battle for the control over my mind. I don't want this to be a battle for the control over my soul. Because I already know what I'm doing. I believe in God, and I'm going to tell you something. There is a creation path and there's a destruction path. And I like to be on the creation path. Okay? There are plenty of people out there who are on the destruction path. And guess what? You need death in order to create life. I mean, when all those leaves die in the fall, what happens in the spring? The leaves come back. So it's not like we don't need that path of destruction. It's not like we don't need that. It's that sometimes it tries to take over. And that's when things get out of balance. And when things are out of balance, that's when you know that you have to take that step back and look at what's going on in your life. You have to actually take the time to look at what's going on in your life. You can't just go on about your life like an automaton, as they might call it, mindless being that just kind of goes on about his daily tasks. I see people driving at 20 miles an hour because they're on their phone texting somebody. I was wondering why that was. Because, it's Portland. I figured, and I maybe shouldn't joke about this right now, but, I always say people have their own personal protests. They're going 20 miles an hour because they feel like they should, like say the speed limit should be slower. But no, I've actually been looking in people's cars and they're. That explains so much in 2020. I saw this line of cars and I was wondering what was going on, and it was just like they were all just stopped. I was just like, what? And so I get over and I just, there was nothing. It's not like the car was broke down or anything. They were just all sitting there all... I'm sure that one of the people, probably the person in front, because I didn't want to look that far, look that hard, is, they're probably on their phone, just stopped in the middle of the freaking roadway, and this is what I'm telling you, is that people are kind of like zombies right now, this is when I should tell you, hey, as much as I love you watching me, get outside, get off the screen, and go do something. Okay? I've been outside today, and I have loved every minute of it. It was nice. I drove, listened to some music. It was great. It was really great. I got out yesterday, went, around town, saw a brother of mine. That was great. So I have been getting out more, which is something that I should do more, because when I'm out, the conversation is less. It's a lot less. Don't get me wrong. It seems like I can pick up on what other people are thinking sometimes. And it's like other people's insecurities. So, excuse me, I was trying not to yawn. My face just got all... it's other people's insecurities. And, I hear stuff that people think about themselves, and maybe that person thinks this of me, maybe that person thinks that of me. And it's just like, oh man, people really have negative thoughts about themselves. And that explains why people think that way about other people as well. But, I have noticed that that one caught me. I've noticed that people... Wow, I just got really tired all of a sudden. People, not all your thoughts are your own. This is why I'm saying this, is because I want to take this last, few minutes to talk about how our subconscious works, how I'm doing things both on a spiritual level and on a physical level, because which obviously means that I'm doing this mentally. So, on all three levels, so that I can know, because that's what's supposed. It's only 7:00. Sorry, guys. And this is tough for me, because I know that people want to know. I know that people want to know. And there was other stuff that I was going to say that I didn't get a chance to say. Um, but we're all on this ride together, and we are evolving. We are on this consciousness shift. We are becoming, we're becoming closer to Creator, closer to Source. We're taking that one step forward, and we're not alone in this. And by this I mean Earthlings. We've got all of our ancestors. Well, I just found out actually, that anyone you're related to is like, like your parents' generation and above. Even if they're living, they're still your ancestors. So I just found that out. That was interesting. But yeah, your ancestors living and otherwise, all of the spirit, all of the source that is here on this planet, and all that is in the universe surrounding us. Because we might have this nice atmosphere that shields us from the radiation of space, shields us from the radiation of the sun, etc. Even still, we've got all this energy that flows from here to the farthest reaches of the universe. Quantum entanglement. When you tickle one photon, another photon on the other side of the universe will laugh. And that's something that I find to be how we are as people. When you feel connected with somebody, then you will know how they're feeling. And I wanted to say something about empathy and empaths, etc. And the reason why is because I think that a lot of people are taking it to be a little bit too far. And the reason why is because it's like in my personal experience, it's not like when I see somebody who's sad, I automatically feel sad, and then I go, oh, they must be sad. It's more like I kind of have a feeling why they're sad. Or we get to talking and, I'll be like, oh. And either I'll get something or I'll hear something, and, it'll be a bit of important information. So I can then say, oh, and then have something that can help them, in their sadness. That is being an empath, It's not just about sensing somebody's feelings. It's about being present with that person and, knowing, it's deeper. It's deeper. And, I know that like a lot of pop culture can talk about these things and make it seem like everyone is an empath. And right now, everyone probably is an empath. But that doesn't mean that we're going to go around, sending each other our emotions. I'm not saying that We can't do that. I'm just saying that that's not exactly the way that was intended. You know, if you want to send love, if you want to send, a feeling of peace and tranquility and, happiness and contentment, then that's cool. But sending all those other things, you know, that's harmful. That's really harmful. And, I know that there is that choice between the path of creation and the path of destruction. The question is, which path are you on? All right, y'all. Much love. I hope you have a good night. And talk to you later. Peace.